Rolling Stones, with songs like Paint It Black, Start Me Up, and Satisfaction, these musicians are rock and roll royalty. So today, we're going to show you 10 very interesting facts about the Rolling Stones. Let's get into it. There has always been the casual Stones versus Beatles question in rock and roll, but one of the best stories I've ever heard was the night the two bands met. The Rolling Stones were performing at the Crawdaddy Club in 1963, and who should show up halfway through the set but four silhouetted leather-clad people, standing just in front of the bandstand in amongst the dancing audience. The Stones' Bill Wyman recalls saying, "We were playing a pub, and we were whacking out our show, and everybody's having a good time, you know? I suddenly turn around, there's these four guys in black leather overcoats, standing there. Oh, fuck me, look who's here!" After noticing the Beatles, Wyman turned round to Charlie Watts and said, "It's the Beatles! They had 2 or 3 big #1 hits, and they were like the rave of England at that time." But the feeling was mutual. George Harrison remarked that the Stones' audience was screamed and shouted and danced on tables, and Ringo says, "I remember standing in some sweaty room and watching them on stage." Keith and Brian, "Wow, I knew then that the Stones were great." After the Stones finished their set, they and the Beatles began chatting over beers, and the Beatles stayed for the second set. Afterwards, they all went back to Mick Jagger's, Keith Richards, and Brian Jones's flat and hung out all night playing blues music and discussing music itself. I love that story, and it kicked off an awesome relationship. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Beatles actually wrote one of the Rolling Stones' first hits, "I Wanna Be Your Man." On February 18, 2006, the Rolling Stones performed at Rio de Janeiro's famous Copacabana Beach at a free concert. A whopping 1.5 million people were in the audience. 1.5 million! The concert was part of the band's Bigger Bang World Tour to promote their new album. It's also the second highest grossing world tour by any band with more than 550 million in revenue. Mick Jagger even won the hearts of Brazilian fans by addressing them mostly in Portuguese. Everyone knows this iconic logo, but the way it came to be is quite interesting. In 1969, Jagger reached out to London's Royal College of Art to employ work of John Pash to develop the logo for the band. John was a 24-year-old student, and Jagger was fond of his work. They agreed on a price of £50 to develop the logo. Mick Jagger had a vision for the logo of the Hindu goddess Kali, typically portrayed with a very pronounced mouth and long tongue sticking out. However, when John met the frontman, it was Jagger's own mouth that inspired him. The Rolling Stones were so happy with the Hot Lips logo that they gave John a bonus of £200. In the beginning, the band had a piano player named Ian Stewart, nicknamed Stu. Their manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, didn't think Stu fit the image and suggested he be removed from playing live with the band. Stu was demoted and graciously stepped aside, becoming the band's road manager, and played keys on nearly all of the band's albums released between 1964 and 1986. But the story was not forgotten. Stu was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the rest of the band in 1989. So get this, the Stones like to get stoned. Who would have thought? Anyway, especially in those days, you had to have a guy to provide you with the goods. The Rolling Stones' guy, through the 60s and 70s, was named Acid King Dave. The Acid King turned out to be a plant in a joint effort from the FBI and MI5. He was a Toronto-born failed actor who was recruited by these government agencies to discredit the group. David was a heavy drug user, so he was the perfect choice to infiltrate the Stones. So in 1967, at a party at Keith Richards' West Sussex mansion, Acid King Dave was a guest and supplied the partygoers drugs, and then left just as the police began a surprise raid on the home. Jagger and Richards were both arrested and jailed for possession of cannabis and amphetamines. They were later acquitted on appeal. In 2016, a television ad was unearthed that showed the Stones recording a jingle for Rice Krispies in the UK. Best Estimates puts the original broadcast of the ad at some time between 1963 and 1964, and it is believed to have had a short run on British television. Rice Krispies. Keith Richards is considered one of the best rhythm guitarists in rock and roll history, and interestingly enough, he achieves this distinctive sound with a rather peculiar tuning setup. Standard guitar tuning is E, A, D, G, B, E, but Keith removes the low E string altogether and tunes the remaining 5 strings to G, D, G, B, D, making it an open G tuning. If it weren't for manager Andrew Loog Oldham, Mick and Keith may have never written any songs at all. They were running out of good songs to cover, and this could mark the demise of the band. Well, their manager, Andrew, decided to lock them in a kitchen and refused to let them out until they wrote an original song. And they did. The song was named Tell Me You're Coming Back, and it appeared on their self-titled first album. In the late 1960s, the Rolling Stones were on their way to becoming one of the most famous, successful bands on the planet. Pop artist Andy Warhol was creating artwork at the Factory in the Union Square area of New York City. The Stones asked Warhol to design the album cover for their upcoming album Sticky Fingers. On April 21, 1969, Mick Jagger sent this letter to famous pop artist Andy Warhol, giving him more details on the job. Essentially, Mick gave Andy free rein and a blank check, and this is what we have. Mick and Keith actually met when they were only 5 years old. They were in primary school together until Mick Jagger moved away in 1950. 10 years later, as luck would have it, the two met on a train platform, and it was revealed how much they had in common, especially a love for the blues. And just like that, the two were inseparable and began their musical journey together. Well, that's all for today, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time.